At Easter dinner, my brother smirked and said, "Not everyone can handle a real tech career." My grandma looked at me and asked, "Is that why your company just bought his?" The whole table went silent. You could have heard a pin drop. Imagine years of being overshadowed, dismissed, told your dreams weren't real enough, only to discover you secretly held the keys to your biggest critic's fate. That Easter Sunday, the truth wasn't just coming to dinner, it was about to ignite a family fireworks display. The crisp April air in our parents' suburban home usually promised a day of comfortable family ritual, but that morning, a strange, electric hum thrummed beneath the surface. Sunlight streamed through the dining room windows, illuminating a table laden with tradition, yet I felt a suffocating pressure, a quiet dread building in my chest. I'm Sarah, I'm 32 years old, and despite running a major tech division, I've always kept my success quiet, especially around my older brother, Daniel. For years, he'd subtly, and not so subtly, dismissed my career, all while inflating his own importance to epic proportions. He had no idea that my company had just acquired his failing startup. My stomach was doing flip-flops as we all gathered around that familiar table, the weight of the secret almost unbearable. But before I tell you exactly what happened when my success finally screamed louder than my brother's ego, hit that like button and let me know if you've ever dealt with a know-it-all family member in the comments below. Growing up in Portland with Daniel, my entire childhood felt like living in his perpetual shadow. From the moment he built his first computer at 12, while I was still happily making friendship bracelets, a pattern was set in stone. Daniel was the tech genius. I was just the little sister, always trying to catch up. "That's nice, Sarah," he'd condescendingly say, every single time I showed him something I was proud of. That dismissive tone was a dagger, making it crystal clear that my accomplishments were mere child's play compared to his magnificent achievements. I remember winning the school science fair in 6th grade. My project on solar energy, which I was so proud of, was immediately written off by Daniel as pretty basic next to the programming competition he'd won that same year. Our parents, Robert and Deborah, never meant to play favorites, but they were utterly mesmerized by Daniel's technical abilities. Dad, an accountant who still struggled with the DVR, would gaze at Daniel like he was speaking an alien language when he talked about coding. Mom, a high school English teacher, would just beam and nod, clearly impressed even when she understood absolutely nothing. "Your brother has a special gift," they'd tell me, as if to soften the blow. Not everyone thinks that way. This insidious pattern continued all through high school. I excelled in business classes, I snagged leadership positions, but all those achievements consistently felt secondary, somehow less important, next to Daniel's programming prowess and his ever-growing collection of robotics trophies. When college applications came around, Daniel, of course, got into MIT with a partial scholarship for computer science. I chose a business program at the University of Washington. And while UW is a phenomenal school with an outstanding reputation, Daniel couldn't help but snicker. "Business? I guess not everyone can handle the rigor of a real STEM program." My parents would offer a half-hearted reprimand. "Daniel, be nice to your sister," Dad would say, but then immediately pivot, asking Daniel about his latest coding project. It effectively validated the very hierarchy Daniel had so carefully constructed, reinforcing that he was the one who mattered. The only person who ever truly saw me was my grandma Martha. She was, and still is, an absolute gem, a complete surprise in our family. At 78, she was rocking an iPad, a smartphone, and, honestly, was more tech-savvy than both my parents combined. She'd been a mathematics professor back in the 70s, a time when women in her field were practically unicorns, and she recognized something in me that everyone else seemed to overlook. "They don't see it yet," she told me once, during my sophomore year of college. I was home for Christmas break, feeling particularly invisible after Daniel had dominated dinner with tales of his internship at Google. "But Sarah, you have something just as valuable as technical knowledge. You understand people and systems. You see the big picture, and that's what really matters in technology, too." Her words were a balm. With her quiet but fierce encouragement, I leaned into my strengths. I graduated with honors, and I landed a job in marketing at a small tech firm called DG Path. Daniel, predictably, was utterly unimpressed. Marketing for a tech company, he scoffed at my graduation dinner. So, you'll be making pretty brochures for products you don't even understand? I felt a surge of anger, a familiar, hot burn. I swallowed it down and silently promised myself I will prove him wrong. I worked twice as hard as anyone else at DG Path. I wasn't just learning marketing. I was diving deep, understanding our products inside and out so I could truly articulate their value to clients. I even took night classes in basic programming, not because I wanted to be a developer, but because I needed to speak the same language as our technical teams. Within 3 years, I climbed to marketing director. Just 2 years after that, I was recruited by Synergy Tech, a major player in enterprise software. But every single step forward in my career, every single achievement, was met with the same infuriatingly dismissive attitude from Daniel. When I excitedly told my family about my new job at Synergy Tech, Daniel simply interrupted with news about his own startup idea. My promotion to team lead? Oh, that just happened to coincide with his first round of seed funding. When I became a department head, he conveniently announced he'd been featured in a tech blog. Family gatherings became a minefield, increasingly tense as Daniel monopolized every conversation with impenetrable technical jargon, always positioning himself as the only person at the table who truly understood the modern world. He'd toss around terms like neural networks and blockchain architecture without a shred of explanation, effectively shutting down any attempt at meaningful contribution from anyone else. "Don't worry if you don't get it," he'd say, almost always directing it at me. "It's pretty complex stuff." My parents, bless their hearts, would just beam with pride, completely oblivious, while I sat there, quietly, meticulously building my career, completely without fanfare. Grandma Martha, though? She'd catch my eye across the table and offer a secret, knowing wink. "Patience," her look seemed to say. "Your time will come." And it did, but in a way I never could have anticipated. 7 years into my incredible career at Synergy, I was appointed Director of Strategic Acquisitions. My job? To pinpoint promising smaller companies for potential purchase. It was during one of those routine reviews of acquisition targets that a name, a sickeningly familiar name, landed right on my desk, next tier. A startup with genuinely promising technology, but clearly struggling financials. It was Daniel's startup. My career path at Synergy Tech hadn't been accidental. It was a deliberate, quiet ascension. While Daniel was out there loudly broadcasting his achievements, I was diligently, meticulously building mine. I started in marketing, yes, but I quickly showed a knack for understanding market trends and spotting opportunities. My unique ability to bridge the gap between highly technical teams and crucial business objectives made me invaluable, and my strategic thinking propelled me up the corporate ladder faster than even I had anticipated. After 8 years, I found myself in this powerful role, Director of Strategic Acquisitions, a position that seamlessly blended my business acumen with all that hard-earned technical knowledge. My team was constantly scouring the landscape, identifying companies that could either enhance Synergy Tech's offerings or neutralize future competition. We dissect dozens of potential acquisitions every quarter, looking beyond just current value to assess their true future potential. It was during one of these regular scouting sessions that Nextier popped up on our radar. They'd developed an innovative approach to machine learning, something that could seriously upgrade our flagship product. They had strong intellectual property, talented engineers, but they were floundering with monetization and market penetration, a classic problem for technically brilliant founders who lacked any real business experience. "This one has potential," my assistant, Alex, noted, sliding the preliminary report across my desk. "Small team, great tech, burning through cash too quickly. Classic acquisition target." I opened the file and my world froze. The founder's name? Daniel Hayes. My brother's company was on our acquisition list, and he had absolutely no idea I was in a position to directly influence its fate. My first, immediate instinct was to recuse myself. Drop it. Walk away. There was an undeniable conflict of interest, and I prided myself on my professional ethics. But before I could even pass the file to a colleague, my curiosity, a deep, simmering curiosity, completely overtook me. What exactly had my brother built? How was his company really performing? For the first time, I had an unfiltered, unvarnished opportunity to peek behind Daniel's meticulously curated narrative. And what I found? It surprised me. The technology itself was genuinely, undeniably innovative. Daniel had always been brilliant, a true technical mind. But his business? It was in deep trouble. Nextier had blown through 2 entire rounds of funding with barely any revenue to show for it. Their customer acquisition costs were insane, completely unsustainable. Their marketing strategy was a mess, inconsistent, non-existent. And they had no clear, viable path to profitability. The very aspects of business that Daniel had so arrogantly dismissed as trivial compared to technical development, those were the exact areas where his entire company was spectacularly failing. I immediately set up a meeting with our Chief Strategy Officer, Jessica Smith, to discuss the explosive situation. I need to disclose a potential conflict, I stated flatly, the moment we sat down. Nextier's founder is my brother. Jessica's eyebrow shot up. I didn't realize your brother was in tech. I actually laughed, a harsh, unexpected sound. Oh, he's made sure everyone knows he's in tech. He just doesn't advertise that his sister works for a corporate sellout like Synergy Tech. After a thorough, frankly uncomfortable, discussion of the ethical considerations, we decided I would recuse myself from direct negotiations. But, crucially, I could remain involved in an advisory capacity. The acquisition made genuine business sense for Synergy Tech, regardless of my personal connection, and my unique knowledge of both the tech sector and my brother's work could prove incredibly valuable. Just keep everything strictly by the book, Jessica advised sternly. Document all communications, and we'll make absolutely sure there's no appearance of either favoritism or sabotage. For the next 3 months, I watched from the very periphery, a silent observer as our acquisition team conducted their intense due diligence on Nextier. Their findings merely confirmed my initial assessment: brilliant technology, absolutely crippled by abysmal business execution. And to my own surprise, despite all my complicated feelings about Daniel, I found myself actively advocating for the acquisition. That technology was worth saving, and the team, perhaps with the exception of its founder, deserved a real chance to succeed with proper support. What truly astounded me during this entire process was Daniel's complete, utter unawareness of my actual role at Synergy Tech. During the few, unavoidable family gatherings that happened in this period, he continued his usual condescending lectures about tech directly to me. Meanwhile, I sat there, quietly, knowing more about his company's dire financial state than he could ever possibly fathom. The acquisition was finalized a week before Easter. Nextier would become a subsidiary of Synergy, their cutting-edge technology integrated directly into our main platform. Daniel would stay on as a technical advisor for 1 year, reporting to a manager who, in a twist of delicious irony, reported directly to me. The financial terms were generous. Far more generous than the company's actual performance warranted. But we weren't buying current revenue. We were paying for the intellectual property and the raw talent. As Easter Sunday loomed closer, my anxiety levels spiked. The inevitable family gathering felt like walking into a trap. Should I tell everyone about my involvement before dinner? Should I warn Daniel? I desperately called Grandma Martha for advice. "You've done nothing wrong, Sarah," she said, her voice firm and unwavering. "You've built a career you should be incredibly proud of, and you've conducted yourself ethically throughout this entire process. If Daniel has misrepresented his success or completely underestimated yours, that's his problem to reconcile. But it's going to be so awkward." I groaned, picturing the scene in my head. "Perhaps," Grandma replied, and I could practically hear the smile in her voice, "but sometimes a little awkwardness is absolutely necessary for growth. Come to dinner, be yourself, and let the truth find its own way to the table." So, that's exactly what I decided. I would go to Easter dinner without preemptively dropping the bombshell about my role in the acquisition. I wouldn't lie if asked directly, but I wouldn't volunteer a single thing either. Let Daniel tell his version first, I thought. a strange mix of dread and anticipation swirling inside me. After all these years of shrinking myself to fit into a shadow, I was genuinely curious, morbidly, perhaps, to see how he would spin his company's successful exit. Easter Sunday arrived cloaked in a deceptive tranquility. The April sky stretched clear and blue, blossoms dotted every tree in my parents' yard, and the air held that distinct, hopeful freshness of spring. I pulled up to my childhood home with David, my boyfriend of 2 years, beside me. He squeezed my hand, a silent reassurance. "Remember, you've done nothing wrong," he said, echoing Grandma Martha's words. "And I'm here for moral support." David knew everything about Daniel. He'd endured enough family gatherings to fully grasp the dynamic, and he'd been my rock, my sounding board throughout this whole nerve-wracking acquisition process. As a high school history teacher, he was wonderfully removed from the tech world, making him the perfect, unbiased party. No, I sighed. I just hate confrontation. "Sometimes it finds you anyway," he replied sagely. Mom greeted us at the door with her customary, effusive enthusiasm, hugging us both tightly. "Sarah, David, so good to see you. Everyone's already here. We're just waiting on Aunt Carol and Uncle Frank." I steeled myself, took a deep breath, and stepped into the living room. There he was, Daniel, holding court by the fireplace, gesturing animatedly, while his wife, Emily, smiled politely beside him. Dad and Uncle Frank were nodding, looking utterly impressed by whatever he was spouting. Emily spotted me first and waved, genuine warmth radiating from her. Despite everything, I'd always truly liked Emily. She was kind, unpretentious, a pediatric nurse who seemed to effortlessly balance Daniel's towering ego with her own grounded nature. "Sarah," she exclaimed, coming over to hug me. "It's been too long." Daniel turned, his performance momentarily interrupted. "Oh, hey sis." "David." He gave my boyfriend a curt nod, then immediately pivoted back to his captivated audience. Anyway, as I was saying, the exit strategy worked perfectly. You have to know when to cash in your chips in this industry. My stomach clenched. Exit strategy. Daniel was already spinning the acquisition as if it had been his brilliant master plan all along, rather than a desperate, necessary lifeline for a sinking ship. "Tech is so volatile right now," he continued, puffing out his chest. "But if you know what you're doing, you can position yourself for maximum leverage." Dad beamed, radiating pure paternal pride. Daniel was just telling us about his company's acquisition. "Sounds like he made quite a deal. Is that right?" I said, keeping my voice deliberately neutral. "Congratulations, Daniel." He shrugged with an exaggerated, affected modesty. "Just how the game is played. Not everyone understands the long-term strategy involved." "Sarah works in tech, too," David interjected helpfully, a glint in his eye. Daniel actually laughed. "Yeah, marketing for some corporate giant. Not quite the same as founding and exiting a startup." Before I could even formulate a cutting response, Mom's voice floated in from the kitchen. "Sarah, could you help me with the deviled eggs?" Grateful for the literal escape, I practically fled to the kitchen, where Grandma Martha was already expertly arranging appetizers on a platter. She looked up as I entered, her eyes twinkling mischievously. "Just in time," she said, handing me a serving spoon. "Your mother needs help, and I need entertainment." "How's our tech mogul spinning his tail out there?" she whispered. "Grandma," I breathed, glancing towards the door. "He's acting like he orchestrated the entire thing as some brilliant, strategic move." She chuckled softly, a knowing sound. "Men like your brother often rewrite history to protect their egos. The question is, what are you going to do about it?" I busied myself with the deviled eggs, carefully spooning the filling. "Nothing, I guess." "What can I do?" "Stand up and announce that his company was failing and my company saved it." "You could," she said, her voice calm and steady, "or you could simply tell the truth if asked directly. Not to humiliate him, but because truth matters, especially in families." "You don't think I should just let it go? Keep the peace?" I pleaded. Grandma Martha placed a warm, comforting hand over mine. "Peace built on falsehood isn't really peace, Sarah. It's suppression. You've spent your whole life diminishing your light so Daniel could shine brighter. Maybe it's time to stop doing that." Mom bustled in before I could respond, assigning us more food prep tasks. The next hour blurred into a flurry of activity as the remaining guests arrived, filling the house with the chaotic, lively energy of a large family gathering. Through it all, I could still hear Daniel's voice, rising above the others, relentlessly shaping his narrative of entrepreneurial brilliance. As I helped Grandma set the dining room table, she murmured, "Stand tall, but don't force it. The truth has a way of finding its moment." Finally, Mom's cheerful voice announced dinner was ready. We all gravitated to the large oak dining table, passing dishes, filling plates high with holiday fare. Daniel, with characteristic precision, had strategically positioned himself dead center, directly across from Dad, the absolute prime spot for commanding attention. David and I sat near one end, with Grandma Martha blessedly by my side. As we settled in for the meal, I felt an almost physical tension building in my shoulders, knotting tighter with every passing second. Daniel had just spent the last hour actively misleading our entire family about his professional situation, all while casually dismissing mine. And here I was, silently complicit in his grand deception. Grandma Martha was absolutely right. This wasn't peace. This was a fragile, false truce. And as the dinner conversation inevitably, predictably, swerved towards careers and accomplishments, I knew, deep down, that the moment of truth was rapidly approaching. Easter dinner in the Hayes family had always been a production, a culinary marathon. Mom's table literally groaned under the weight of traditional favorites: honey-glazed ham, creamy scalloped potatoes, green bean casserole, and her famous yeast rolls that took an entire day to prepare. Crystal glasses, brought out only for these special occasions, sparkled under the dining room chandelier. The good china, a precious wedding gift from my grandparents, was arranged in perfect, pristine place settings. Aunt Carol raised her glass, her voice gentle. "Before we start, I think we should toast to family, to spring, and to new beginnings. And to success," Daniel added quickly, brazenly raising his own glass even higher. "To new ventures and knowing when to cash out." Everyone dutifully lifted their glasses, though I noticed Emily's smile was thin, almost pained. Grandma Martha's eyes met mine across the table, a fleeting, powerful connection, before we all took a sip and began passing dishes around. The conversation meandered pleasantly at first, safely centered on Cousin Laura's new baby, Uncle Frank's recent retirement, and Aunt Carol's exciting trip to Italy. But as the meal wore on, Daniel grew noticeably restless with any topic that didn't allow him to be the shining star, to parade his achievements. The moment there was a brief lull, he pounced. "So, Dad, I've been thinking about advising you on your retirement portfolio," he declared, carving into his ham with a flourish. "After this acquisition, I've got some unique insights into where tech is headed that could really maximize your returns." Dad's eyes lit up, clearly impressed. "That would be great, son. I could certainly use the help." "What about you, Sarah?" Aunt Carol asked kindly, turning to me. "How's work going for you?" "Still at the same company." Before I could even open my mouth, Daniel interrupted, "Of course. Sarah's still doing marketing at that big corporate place." "What is it again?" "Synergysoft." "Synergy Tech," I corrected quietly, my jaw tight. Right. Daniel continued, utterly dismissive. "Anyway, as I was telling Dad, the real action is in startups. Corporate tech? That's where innovation goes to die." I took a slow, deep breath, trying desperately to contain the anger bubbling inside me. "Actually, the problem with corporate environments," Daniel plowed on, warming to his favorite topic, "is that they're full of people who couldn't cut it as entrepreneurs. No offense. Sarah," he added, flashing a patronizing smile that made it painstakingly clear offense was absolutely intended. Mom tried to gently redirect. "Sarah has been promoted several times, Daniel. She's doing very well." Sure. Daniel nodded condescendingly. "I'm sure she's great at whatever marketing stuff she does, but let's be real, it's not the same as being in the trenches, building something from nothing, taking real risks." The entire table had fallen into an uncomfortable, heavy silence. Even David, normally diplomatic to a fault, was gripping his fork with a white-knuckled intensity. I focused on meticulously cutting my ham into perfectly even pieces, willing myself to stay utterly, completely calm. Daniel, blissfully oblivious to the rising tension, or perhaps thriving on it, continued his self-aggrandizing monologue. The tech industry separates the visionaries from the support staff pretty quickly. Some people have what it takes to innovate, to disrupt, to lead technological revolutions. Others are better suited to, well, supporting roles. He looked directly at me, his gaze dripping with implied superiority. Not everyone can handle a real career in tech. The silence that followed was truly deafening. You could have heard a pin drop. Mom looked utterly mortified. Dad shifted, deeply uncomfortable. Emily was staring intently at her plate, as if it held all the answers. I felt David's hand find mine under the table, squeezing, offering silent, powerful support. And then, from the other end of the table, came Grandma Martha's clear, steady voice, cutting through the thick silence like a laser. Is that why your company just bought his? Time stopped. Literally. All eyes swiveled from Grandma to me, then to Daniel, whose fork clattered with a deafening clink against his plate. His face, usually so carefully composed, cycled rapidly through pure confusion, then utter disbelief, and then a horrifying dawning realization. What? He sputtered, looking frantically between Grandma and me. What are you talking about? Grandma Martha took a calm, deliberate sip of her water. I'm simply asking if that's why Sarah's company, Synergy, acquired your startup next year. Because they're the real tech innovators. The table erupted in confused murmurs. Dad looked utterly bewildered. Sarah's company bought Daniel's? What does that mean? Daniel's face had flushed a dangerous, deep red. That's not what happened, he stammered, scrambling. We were acquired, yes, but it was a strategic exit. I chose to sell, and Sarah had absolutely nothing to do with it. She works in marketing, for God's sake. All eyes snapped to me. For a fleeting moment, I actually considered letting it go, finding some diplomatic way to preserve Daniel's rapidly crumbling dignity. But then I remembered Grandma's unwavering words about truth in families and all the soul-crushing years I'd spent dimming my own light so he could shine brighter. Actually, I said, my voice steadier, stronger than I ever expected it to be, I'm the Director of Strategic Acquisitions at Synergy Tech. I've been in that role for almost 2 years now. Daniel stared at me, his eyes wide with disbelief. That's impossible. You would have said something. Would I? I asked quietly, letting the question hang in the air. When would I have mentioned it, Daniel? Between your monologues about neural networks and blockchain, or your explanations of why marketing isn't real tech work. Wait, Dad interjected, utterly lost. You're saying you were involved in buying Daniel's company? She's lying. Daniel snapped, his voice rising. She's trying to take credit for my exit. If she worked in acquisitions, I would have known. My team dealt with Synergy Tech executives. Your team dealt with my team, I corrected him, holding his gaze. I recused myself from direct negotiations because of our relationship, yes. But I was absolutely involved in an advisory capacity, and I'm the one who initially identified Nextier as an acquisition target. The stunned silence that followed was finally, mercifully, broken by Emily's soft, hesitant voice. It's true, Daniel. I saw Sarah's name on some of the preliminary paperwork. I assumed you knew and just weren't mentioning it. Daniel looked utterly betrayed, his jaw slack. You knew? And you didn't tell me. I thought you knew. Emily protested, bewildered. Why wouldn't you know? Because she's lying. Daniel roared, pushing back from the table so violently his chair scraped against the hardwood floor with a harsh shriek. This is sabotage. You deliberately targeted my company, didn't you? Couldn't stand that I was finally succeeding, so you had to take over and ruin it. Your company was 3 months from bankruptcy, Daniel, I stated, my voice eerily calm, level. You had great technology, but no sustainable business model. The acquisition saved your company, your employees' jobs, and your reputation. How dare you? Daniel was nearly shouting now. You know nothing about tech business, Daniel, Mom interjected, her voice trembling. Please calm down. I will not calm down, he snapped, glaring at her. My sister has been undermining me my entire life, and now she's claiming she saved my company. That's rich. I slowly scanned the table, looking at the utterly shocked faces of my family. I'm not claiming I saved anything, I said, my voice resonating with a quiet authority. I'm just telling the truth about what I do and what happened. Next tier had valuable intellectual property and genuinely talented engineers. That's why we acquired it. It was a business decision, not a personal one. Daniel laughed, a short, bitter sound. Right. Just business. Is that why you never mentioned your role? Because it was so impersonal. I never mentioned my role because you never asked, I said simply, my gaze unwavering. You've never been interested in my career, Daniel. You've been too busy explaining to everyone why what you do is so much more important. The raw, unfiltered honesty of my statement hung heavy in the air. Daniel opened his mouth to argue, then clamped it shut. Without another word, without even a glance back, he turned abruptly and stormed out of the dining room. A moment later, the front door slammed shut with a final, echoing bang. The table remained silent for several long, excruciating seconds. Finally, Uncle Frank cleared his throat, a hesitant, awkward sound. Well, that was unexpected. Aunt Carol turned to me, her eyes wide. Sarah, honey, I had no idea you were so high up in your company. Why haven't you ever told us? I looked around at my family, at the genuine surprise and interest now etched onto their faces. And in that moment, a colossal weight I hadn't even realized I was carrying began, slowly, blessedly, to lift. I guess no one ever really asked, I said softly, almost to myself. As the shock of Daniel's dramatic departure settled over the table, all eyes turned to me. The entire family dynamic had shifted so abruptly, so violently, that no one seemed to know how to proceed. Emily looked particularly uncomfortable, visibly caught between loyalty to her husband and the raw, uncomfortable truth that had just been exposed. Perhaps, Grandma Martha suggested gently, her voice a balm, this would be a good time for Sarah to tell us about her actual career. Mom nodded eagerly, though her eyes kept darting nervously to the front door where Daniel had exited. Yes, please. I feel terrible that we don't know more about what you do. Sweetheart. I took a deep, steadying breath, feeling strangely vulnerable. For years, I'd unconsciously protected myself by keeping my professional life completely separate from my family, partly because of Daniel's dismissive attitude, and partly because I'd just grown so accustomed to being overlooked. I started at Synergy Tech and Marketing. That's true, I began, my voice gaining strength. But I moved into product strategy after 2 years, then to business development, and finally to acquisitions. I've been with the company for 9 years now. 9 years. Dad looked genuinely surprised. That's impressive in tech, isn't it? Such a volatile industry. David nodded, beaming with pride. Extremely impressive. Sarah manages a team of 15 people and reports directly to the C-suite. A small, genuine smile tugged at my lips as I glanced at my incredibly supportive boyfriend. It's a good position. I genuinely enjoy the work. But what exactly do you do? Aunt Carol asked, seeming genuinely, deeply interested. So, I told them. I explained how my team identified promising companies with valuable technology or market positions, how we meticulously evaluated their potential fit with Synergy Tech, and how we structured deals that benefited both parties. I described the intense due diligence process, the complex negotiation strategies, and the integration challenges that inevitably followed acquisitions. That sounds incredibly complex, Uncle Frank commented, awe in his voice. I had no idea. And next year? Dad asked cautiously, his voice softer now. How did that come about? I explained the process as factually as possible, emphasizing the purely professional aspects and carefully downplaying any personal elements. The technology was genuinely innovative, I said, determined to be fair to Daniel despite everything. Our technical team was truly impressed with what they'd built, but the business fundamentals just weren't strong enough to sustain the company independently. So, you saved them, Aunt Carol concluded, her eyes wide. We made a business decision that benefited both companies, I corrected gently. Synergy Tech gained valuable intellectual property and talent. Next year's investors got a better return than they would have otherwise, and their employees got job security. And Daniel? Mom asked quietly, her voice full of concern. Daniel received fair compensation for his work and has a 1-year contract as a technical advisor, I explained. After that, he can stay on if both parties agree it's working out. Emily, who had been completely silent until now, suddenly spoke up, her voice fragile. The acquisition, it saved us financially, she admitted, looking down at her hands. Daniel wouldn't want me to say this, but we were in serious trouble. He put everything into the company, our savings, a second mortgage on our house. We were 3 missed payrolls away from losing absolutely everything. Her raw honesty surprised me. Daniel had always painted their life as one of startup glamour and imminent, sky-high success. I'd had no idea they were so incredibly vulnerable, so financially precarious. I didn't know it was that serious, I said softly, my heart sinking. Emily nodded, a single tear tracing a path down her cheek. Daniel is proud. He would never admit how bad things had gotten. When Synergy Tech's offer came through, it was like a miracle, a true blessing. But he couldn't see it that way. To him, it felt like failure. Dad looked troubled, a deep furrow in his brow. But why wouldn't he tell us? We could have helped. For the same reason he couldn't admit Sarah might be successful in tech, Grandma Martha interjected wisely, her gaze sharp. Pride. The conversation paused, a moment of profound reflection as we all absorbed this. I felt a complex, swirling mix of emotions, a sense of vindication, that my family finally understood my career, a deep sadness for Daniel's struggles, despite his past behavior, and a lingering, powerful frustration that it had taken this kind of painful, public confrontation for the truth to finally emerge. I should probably go talk to him, Emily said, starting to push back her chair. No, I interjected, making a sudden, firm decision. I'll go. David squeezed my hand, his eyes asking, are you sure? I nodded. We need to clear the air once and for all. As I pushed back from the table, Mom looked worried. Sarah, maybe give him some time to cool down first. We've given this situation years to cool down, Mom, I replied, my voice steady. I think it's time for some honest conversation. I found Daniel sitting slumped on the front porch steps, staring blankly out at the quiet suburban street. He didn't look up when I sat down beside him, leaving a careful, deliberate distance between us. Come to gloat, he asked flatly, his voice devoid of emotion. No, I said. I came to talk. Actually talk, for once. He gave a humorless, bitter laugh. What's there to talk about? You won. Congratulations. This isn't about winning or losing, Daniel, I countered, my voice firm. It's about truth. And the truth is, I've spent my entire career being dismissed by you. Watching you convince our family that what I do doesn't matter because it's not real tech work. So, this was revenge, he snarled, a fresh wave of anger surging in his voice. Getting your company to swallow mine. I sighed, a deep breath of pure frustration. Do you really believe that? Do you honestly think I would risk my professional reputation and potentially violate corporate ethics just to get back at you? Daniel was quiet for a moment, his anger visibly deflating. When did you become director of acquisitions? He finally asked, his voice subdued. 2 years ago. And you never thought to mention it at family gatherings? When would I have mentioned it, Daniel? I asked, my voice carrying a lifetime of exasperation. Between your monologues about neural networks and blockchain, you've never once asked me about my career. Not once. He had the grace to look slightly abashed, his gaze fixed on the pavement. I just assumed. You assumed I was still in the same entry-level marketing position I started in 9 years ago. I finished for him, the words tumbling out. Because that fit your narrative, Daniel. The one that said I wasn't capable of understanding real tech. Meanwhile, I've been steadily advancing, managing larger teams, taking on more responsibility, and actually succeeding in the very industry you claim I'm not cut out for. Daniel remained silent for several long, tense moments, staring intently at his hands, as if seeking answers there. When he finally spoke, his voice had lost its defensive, angry edge, replaced by something raw and vulnerable. Next year, it really was failing, wasn't it? The vulnerability in his question, The sheer admission caught me completely off guard. The technology was sound, I said carefully, choosing my words. But yes, the business was in deep trouble. I kept thinking the next round of funding would solve everything, he admitted, a quiet desperation in his tone. That we just needed a little more runway. But each milestone we set, we'd miss or barely hit, and then we'd set a new one. That's actually pretty common in startups, I offered, trying to soften the blow. It's why most fail. I didn't want to fail. For the first time, Daniel looked directly at me, and I was startled to see the raw, undeniable pain in his expression. I've built my entire identity around being the tech genius in the family. What am I if that's not true? The question hung between us, heavy with years of competition, misunderstanding, and unspoken hurts. I thought carefully before responding. You're a tech genius, Daniel. Your coding skills are incredible, and the core technology at Nextier is genuinely innovative. That's not in question. But I paused. But building a successful company requires more than just technical brilliance. It needs business acumen, market understanding, strategic planning, all the things you've dismissed as unimportant compared to coding. He winced, a flicker of recognition in his eyes. Things you're good at. Yes, I acknowledged, meeting his gaze. Things I'm good at. We could have been complementing each other's strengths all these years, instead of you treating me like I was somehow less than you because I focused on the business side of tech. Daniel ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so familiar from our childhood it momentarily transported me back to simpler times. I've been an ass, haven't I? The blunt admission, so out of character, startled a short, sharp laugh out of me. Yes, Daniel. You really have. A ghost of a smile, fragile but real, crossed his face. Can I blame it on the stereotypical arrogance of programmers? You can try, I shot back, a playful edge to my voice, but I work with plenty of programmers who manage not to be condescending to their sisters. The smile faded, and Daniel looked genuinely, truly remorseful. I'm sorry, Sarah. I really am. I don't think I realized how dismissive I've been until I heard it played back to me today. It was the first genuine apology I could remember receiving from my brother in years, possibly decades. Thank you for saying that. So, what happens now, he asked, his gaze drifting to the street again. With Nextier, I mean. With me. That depends partly on you, I said. Honestly, the integration team thinks your technology has real potential as part of our enterprise suite. You know the code better than anyone. If you can put aside your pride and work collaboratively, there's a place for you. Working for my little sister's company, he said, but this time, there was no bitterness, just a strange, thoughtful tone. Working with a company that values your technical expertise, I corrected, my voice soft but firm. My division oversees acquisitions, but I wouldn't be your direct manager. That would be Marcus in technical integration, and he's brilliant. You'd learn a lot from him. Daniel was quiet for a moment, absorbing this. I need to think about it. That's fair, I agreed, but don't think too long. Tech moves quickly, as you know. We sat in silence for a few minutes, watching a neighbor walk their dog across the street. It wasn't a comfortable silence, not exactly, but it definitely wasn't hostile either. Progress of a sort. We should probably go back inside, I finally suggested. Mom's probably worried. And your food is getting cold. Daniel nodded, a small sigh escaping him. This is going to be awkward, isn't it? Probably, I admitted. But maybe it's time we were honest with each other, and with the family. No more pretending. He took a deep breath and stood up. No more pretending, he agreed, offering me his hand. I took it, allowing him to help me up, and together we walked back towards the house, towards a family dinner that would be uncomfortable, yes, but also, perhaps, the first truly honest one we'd had in years. Walking back into the dining room with Daniel felt like stepping into an entirely different dimension. The conversation, which had awkwardly resumed, stopped abruptly. All eyes swiveled towards us, a mix of concern and burning curiosity. Emily looked particularly relieved to see her husband, some of the deep tension visibly leaving her shoulders. Everything okay? Mom asked cautiously, her voice soft. Daniel and I exchanged a loaded glance. We're working on it, I answered honestly. We returned to our seats, and an almost suffocating awkward silence descended upon the table once more. Uncle Frank cleared his throat, a loud, nervous sound. "Should we continue with dinner?" "Yes, please," I said gratefully, feeling a desperate need for normalcy. "Pass the potatoes." The meal resumed with a forced, fragile normalcy, the conversation carefully steered towards neutral topics. But there was an unspoken, palpable acknowledgement that something fundamental had irrevocably shifted in our family dynamic. Daniel was uncharacteristically quiet, contributing to the conversation only when directly addressed. I could almost see him processing everything, painstakingly recalibrating his understanding of our relationship and his own place in the family narrative. As dessert, Mom's traditional, perfect lemon meringue pie was being served. Daniel suddenly spoke up, his voice lacking its usual bluster, tinged with a raw vulnerability. "I owe everyone an apology," he said, surprising us all. "Especially you, Sarah." All eyes snapped to him, wide with surprise. "Daniel Hayes? Apologize?" It simply wasn't in his repertoire. "I haven't been honest about my company's situation," he continued, his gaze fixed somewhere on the tabletop. "The truth is, next year was struggling badly. The acquisition by Synergy Tech wasn't my brilliant exit strategy. It was a lifeline I was incredibly lucky to get." Emily reached over, her hand finding his, squeezing it supportively. "And I've been less than supportive of Sarah's career," he admitted, his voice growing stronger, more contrite. "Actually, that's an understatement. I've been dismissive and condescending, and I was completely wrong. She's achieved more in tech than I realized, and I should have been celebrating her success instead of diminishing it." The raw, gut-wrenching honesty in his voice rendered me absolutely speechless. This was a side of Daniel I hadn't seen since we were very young, before competition and ego had erected an impenetrable wall between us. Dad looked between us, visibly struggling to reconcile this new, startling information with years of established family dynamics. "Daniel, we had no idea things were so difficult with your company. Why didn't you tell us?" Daniel shrugged, a gesture that was both defensive and deeply vulnerable. "Pride, I guess. I've always been the tech prodigy, the successful one. Admitting failure, it just didn't fit that image." "But sweetheart," Mom said gently, her voice full of love, "success isn't just about never failing. It's about how you handle challenges." Besides, Grandma Martha added with characteristic, unflinching directness, "It seems the real tech success story in this family has been quietly unfolding while we were all distracted by louder, more self-serving narratives." She smiled at me, and I felt a profound rush of gratitude for her unwavering support, her steadfast belief in me. "I think," Dad said slowly, his voice laced with regret, "that we owe Sarah an apology, too." He turned to me, genuine regret shining in his eyes. "We should have asked more questions about your career, celebrated your achievements the way we celebrated Daniel's. I'm sorry we didn't do that." "We're very proud of you, sweetheart," Mom added, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I just wish we'd known more about what you were accomplishing." The validation I'd unconsciously yearned for years washed over me, a powerful, overwhelming wave. It was both deeply gratifying and, strangely, slightly discomforting in its intensity. "Thank you," I managed, my voice thick with emotion. That means a lot." "So, what happens now?" Aunt Carol asked, breaking the silence. "With the company, I mean." Daniel looked to me, a tacit acknowledgement of my expertise. It was such a profound reversal of our usual dynamic that it took me a moment to respond. "Next year's technology will be integrated into Synergy Tech's main platform," I explained. "The technical team has the option to join Synergy, including Daniel, who has a 1-year contract as a technical advisor." "And will you?" Uncle Frank asked Daniel directly. "Stay on, I mean?" Daniel glanced at me, then at Emily, before answering. "I'm considering it. It would mean accepting a different role than I'm used to." But then he paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "Maybe it's time I learned some new skills. The business side of things, specifically." It was as close to an acknowledgement of my expertise as I'd ever heard from him, a monumental shift. I decided to meet him halfway. "The tech industry works best when different types of expertise collaborate," I offered. Technical brilliance and business acumen aren't mutually exclusive. They're complementary. Like brother and sister, Grandma Martha suggested with a knowing, warm smile. Daniel actually laughed, a genuine, heartfelt sound. Exactly like that, I suppose. As the meal continued, the conversation began to flow more naturally, more authentically. For perhaps the very first time in our adult lives, Daniel and I engaged in a genuine dialogue, rather than parallel monologues or one-sided lectures. He asked questions about my role at Synergy Tech with authentic interest, and I inquired about the complex technical challenges he'd solved at Nextier. Our family watched this unfolding exchange with something akin to wonder, as if witnessing a rare, beautiful natural phenomenon. After dessert, as we helped clear the table, Dad pulled me aside. "I had no idea, Sarah," he said quietly, his voice full of a gentle sorrow. "About your job, about how successful you've become. Why didn't you tell us more?" I considered the question seriously. "I think after a while, I just got used to being in the background, Dad. Daniel was always so forceful about his accomplishments that it just seemed easier to stay quiet about mine." Dad looked genuinely distressed, a pang of guilt in his eyes. "We should have noticed." "I should have noticed." "It's okay, Dad," I reassured him, squeezing his arm. We all fell into patterns. But maybe now, we can create some new ones. Later, as we gathered in the living room for coffee, Grandma Martha orchestrated a moment that would have seemed utterly impossible just a few hours prior. "I think," she announced, with the absolute authority only an elder matriarch can wield, "that we should have a proper toast to both my grandchildren and their achievements in technology." She raised her coffee cup, her eyes twinkling mischievously. "To Daniel, whose technical brilliance created valuable innovation, and to Sarah, whose business acumen ensures that innovation reaches its full potential in the market. May they both continue to succeed, perhaps even together." "To Daniel and Sarah," the family echoed, raising their cups. Daniel caught my eye across the room and raised his cup a little higher, specifically in my direction. A simple acknowledgement, yes, but one that spoke volumes about the seismic shift in our relationship. As the afternoon slowly bled into evening and guests began to depart, Daniel approached me one last time. "I meant what I said earlier," he told me quietly, his voice still subdued. "I am sorry for how I've treated you and your career." "I know," I said, "and I appreciate that, Daniel." He hesitated for a moment, then added, a hint of genuine excitement in his eyes, "I'm going to take the position at Synergy Tech. I've got a lot to learn about the business side of tech." He smiled ruefully. "It seems I have access to a pretty good teacher." I couldn't help but smile back, a genuine, warm smile. "Just promise not to call it not real tech work, and we'll be fine." "Deal," he agreed, extending his hand formally. I bypassed the handshake, pulling him into a quick, unexpected hug instead. "Happy Easter, Daniel." "Happy Easter, Sarah," he replied. And for the very first time in years, the nickname Sarah held affection, a tender warmth, rather than his usual condescension. As David and I drove home that evening, I felt both utterly exhausted and strangely, beautifully invigorated. Years of ingrained family dynamics had been appended in a single, intense afternoon. Old, painful patterns had been disrupted, and new, hopeful possibilities were slowly, tentatively, beginning to emerge. "How are you feeling?" David asked, his hand resting on my knee as we navigated the evening traffic. I considered the question carefully. "Like something that's been knotted for a very long time is finally starting to untangle," I said. "It's uncomfortable, but it's also freeing." He smiled, squeezing my hand. "Your grandmother is something else, you know that?" I laughed, a genuine, bubbling sound. "Oh, I know. She's been waiting for this showdown for years." "Do you think things will actually change with Daniel?" he mused. "I think they already have," I said thoughtfully. "Whether those changes stick, well, that's up to both of us." As we pulled into our driveway, I realized I felt lighter than I had in years. The truth, once finally spoken, had cleared away long-standing cobwebs of misunderstanding and bitter resentment. There would be awkward moments ahead, of course, old habits reasserting themselves, new boundaries to establish. But for the first time since childhood, I felt a genuine, profound hope for my relationship with my brother. Not as competitors, but as colleagues, maybe even collaborators. Family. 3 months after that fateful Easter dinner, I found myself sitting across from Daniel in the bustling Synergy Tech cafeteria. It had become our weekly ritual, Tuesday lunch, a time to hash out the integration of next year's technology and simply catch up as siblings. Today, Daniel was animated, practically buzzing, explaining a new approach to the algorithm that had been next year's core innovation. The processing speed has increased by 37%, he exclaimed, his eyes bright with that familiar, infectious excitement that had always characterized him when discussing technical challenges. Marcus thinks we can push it even further if we restructure the data pipeline. I smiled, genuinely impressed. That's fantastic, Daniel. Our enterprise clients are going to love that kind of performance boost. It's actually building on something your data science team suggested, he admitted, a statement that would have been utterly unthinkable 4 months ago. Turns out there are some smart people here at the corporate sellout. We both laughed, a shared, comfortable sound, at his self-deprecating reference to his former dismissal of Synergy Tech. In the 3 months since Daniel had joined the company, I'd watched him slowly, painstakingly adapt to corporate culture. There had been rough patches, absolutely. His tendency to speak bluntly had ruffled more than a few feathers in HR, and he'd initially bristled at the many layers of approval required for even minor changes. But he was learning. More surprisingly, he seemed to be genuinely enjoying the stability and immense resources a larger company could provide. "How are things with Marcus?" I asked, referring to his direct manager. Daniel considered the question. "Good, actually. He knows his stuff. And he doesn't micromanage. I'm learning a lot about project management from him and team leadership." He paused, then added ruefully, still a work in progress. "Turns out managing people requires skills I haven't fully developed yet." This self-awareness, this raw honesty, was perhaps the most striking change in my brother. The Daniel of 6 months ago would never, ever have acknowledged any skill deficit. "You'll get there," I assured him, smiling. "It takes time." Our conversation naturally drifted to family matters. Mom and Dad had visited the Synergy Tech campus the previous week, finally seeing firsthand what both their children did professionally. It had been a revelation for them, especially Dad, who had spent the entire tour alternating between proud exclamations and hilariously confused questions about technology. "I think they're still processing it all," Daniel said, a wry grin on his face. 20 years of thinking I was the only tech person in the family, and now they're trying to understand that you've been quietly outranking me for years. "Not outranking," I corrected gently. "Different paths, different skills." He nodded, acknowledging the subtle but crucial distinction. "Fair enough. Speaking of family, are you free for dinner at Grandma Martha's this weekend?" She specifically requested both of us. I smiled. Since Easter, our grandmother had become even more deliberate, almost aggressively so, in fostering our rebuilt relationship. Wouldn't miss it. That woman's cooking is worth any family therapy session she might have planned. "She's subtle as a sledgehammer," Daniel agreed affectionately, but effective. As we finished lunch and walked back towards our respective departments, I reflected on just how much had truly changed. Our relationship remained a work in progress, no doubt. Decades of deeply entrenched patterns couldn't be undone in mere months. But each interaction felt more authentic, more honest than the last. There were still moments, of course, when Daniel slipped into his old, condescending tone when discussing technical matters. But now, almost immediately, he caught himself, often with a sheepish smile and a quick apology. Similarly, I was learning to assert my expertise, to take up space, rather than silently seething when overlooked. Our parents, too, were slowly adapting to this strange, new family dynamic. Mom had started asking specific, insightful questions about my work, making a genuine effort to understand what I did. Dad had even begun forwarding me articles about women in tech leadership, his sweet, clumsy way of showing he finally recognized my place in that world. The most profound change, however, was internal. After years of diminishing my accomplishments to keep a fragile peace in the family, I was finally learning to take up space, to proudly acknowledge my expertise, to correct misperceptions without apology. In professional settings, this newfound confidence had already translated to more effective leadership and clearer, more powerful communication with my team. The following weekend, as promised, Daniel and I joined Grandma Martha for dinner at her cozy apartment. After a comforting meal of her famous pot roast, she served coffee in her living room, fixing us both with her characteristic, no-nonsense direct gaze. "So," she said, settling into her favorite armchair, "how are my two tech executives getting along these days?" Daniel and I exchanged amused glances, a silent agreement passing between us. "Subtlety isn't your strong suit, is it, Grandma?" I teased playfully. "At my age, dear," she replied, a twinkle in her eye. "There's no time for beating around the bush." "Well, we're doing well," Daniel answered, a genuine smile on his face. "Better than I expected, honestly." "He's learning to accept feedback without taking it as a personal attack," I added with a smirk, nudging him gently. "And she's learning to give feedback without sounding like a corporate training manual," Daniel countered good-naturedly, a rare display of self-awareness. Grandma Martha beamed, satisfaction radiating from her expression. "Good. Families should be honest with each other, but kindly so." "I've been thinking about that a lot lately," I said, the gravity of the topic settling over me. "About honesty and families." For years, we all participated in this elaborate fiction that Daniel was the only tech success story. Me, by staying quiet about my achievements, Daniel, by exaggerating his, and the rest of the family, by never questioning the narrative. It was comfortable, Daniel admitted, a thoughtful frown creasing his brow. For me, anyway. I got to be the star. "And what have you learned from having that comfort disrupted?" Grandma asked him, her gaze unwavering. Daniel considered the question seriously, weighing his words. "That comfort isn't always growth. That being the star kept me from learning things I needed to know. And that," he glanced at me, a hint of regret in his eyes, "that I missed out on a potential ally by treating my sister like a competitor." Grandma nodded approvingly before turning her attention to me. "And you, Sarah? What have you learned?" "That silence isn't actually peace," I said, the words coming from a deep, true place. "That diminishing myself to make others comfortable wasn't serving anyone, least of all me. And that authenticity, while sometimes uncomfortable, is the only way to be truly known and loved." "Very good," Grandma said, sounding exactly like the wise professor she once was. "Now, the real test will be taking these lessons forward. Family patterns have a way of reasserting themselves if we're not vigilant." "We're working on it," I assured her, glancing at Daniel. Daniel has actually been asking for my input on managing his team at Synergy Tech, and Sarah's been consulting me on technical aspects of upcoming acquisitions, Daniel added, a note of pride in his voice. "Turns out our skills really do complement each other." "As I've been saying for approximately 30 years, Grandma noted dryly, a mischievous glint in her eye. We laughed, the sound of genuine affection filling her small apartment. As the evening wound down and we prepared to leave, Grandma Martha held both our hands in hers, her grip firm and loving. "I'm proud of you both," she said simply, her voice imbued with deep sincerity. "Not just for your professional accomplishments, impressive as they are, but for doing the hard work of breaking unhealthy patterns. That takes more courage than any career achievement." On the drive home, I found myself reflecting deeply on her words. It had indeed taken immense courage to disrupt the comfortable, deceptive fiction our family had maintained for years. But the profound freedom that came with authenticity was worth every single moment of temporary discomfort. Daniel and I would never have a perfect relationship. Siblings rarely do. We were too different in our approaches, too shaped by our individual experiences. But we had finally found a way to respect those differences, rather than allowing them to divide us. To see them as complementary, rather than competitive. In the tech industry, where change is the only constant, adaptability is essential for success. Daniel and I had finally applied that crucial principle to our personal relationship, and both of us, individually and together, were undeniably stronger for it. The truth, as it turned out, hadn't destroyed our family as I'd once feared. It had painstakingly rebuilt it on a more solid, more honest foundation. One where achievements weren't compared, but genuinely celebrated, where differences weren't threats, but invaluable assets, and where being truly known was infinitely more important than simply being impressive. It was a lesson I carried forward into all aspects of my life, that authentic connections, built on honesty rather than performance, were the most valuable technology of all. Have you ever experienced a moment where standing in your truth completely transformed a relationship for the better? Or maybe you're still grappling with those unspoken family dynamics. I'd love to hear your stories and insights in the comments below. I promise, I'll be reading every single one. And if this journey of sibling rivalry turned collaboration resonated with you, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and share this video with someone who might need permission to shine their own light without dimming it for others. Thank you for watching, and remember, sometimes the most important disruption isn't in technology, but in the patterns we've accepted for far too long.